When you think about a group of people being historically described as God's chosen, there is a very specific image that comes to mind. You kind of expect a certain level of, well, holiness.
Right. You expect a narrative of uninterrupted moral triumph. Like the standard assumption is that a divine calling equals this elevated reality on the ground.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. A shining city on a hill. You just assume their historical record is going to be filled with these righteous, flawless leaders who, consistently make the right moral calls. But then, you actually read this historical record of ancient Israel, and suddenly that image is completely shattered.
It really is.
It doesn't read like a triumph at all. It reads much more like an endless, exhausting tragedy of corrupt kings, political assassinations, and just profound moral failure.
It is a stunning paradox. The very people tasked with representing the divine to the rest of the world seem to be stuck in this generational cycle of doing the exact opposite.
And that paradox is the driving force behind the incredibly provocative essay we're looking at for today's deep dive.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece.
It's a recently published Substack piece by an author who goes by Metamodern Listener titled "They Did Evil in the Eyes of the Lord." And our mission today is to unpack this author's incredibly ambitious thesis.
Right.
They are drawing a direct, unbroken line between ancient biblical theology, the concept of spiritual warfare, and the immediate, highly volatile geopolitical crises of 2026.
And look, we have to acknowledge right out of the gate.
Yeah, please.
This author is stepping onto a third rail.
Yeah.
They are taking a fiercely critical, highly controversial stance on the Israeli government, the ongoing war in Gaza, the recent escalation with Iran, and even specific U.S. politicians.
It pulls absolutely no punches, like none.
It really doesn't. So our job today as your guides is absolutely not to pick a side or validate the author's politics or, tell you what to think about the Middle East.
Right, we are just the messengers here.
Exactly. Our goal is to impartially x-ray this incredible argument they've built. We're here to map the terrain of their perspective so you can understand how they're connecting ancient scripture to today's headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the author's modern political critique, we first have to, rewind the clock about 3,000 years.
We do.
The foundation of this entire essay rests on the framework of the biblical books of 1st and 2nd Kings. And we aren't just talking about a dry historical timeline here. Right?
No, not at all. We are talking about a completely different way of recording history. The essay references a concept from a Yale University open lecture called Deuteronomistic history.
That's a mouthful.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But we can drop the academic jargon because the core concept is actually what's fascinating. Today, if we write a history of a nation, we measure success by economic growth, military victories, or technological advancements.
Right. The GDP goes up, the leader is good,
Yeah.
You win the war, you get a statue.
Exactly. But the biblical books of Kings are written as theological history. In this framework, a nation's historical outcomes.
Like whether they win wars or experience famine.
Yes, exactly. Or whether they are conquered entirely. All of that is tied directly and exclusively to their covenant loyalty to God. It is a completely spiritual scorecard.
A spiritual scorecard. The author actually includes this incredible graphic by an illustrator named Mark Berry to hammer this point home.
It's a great visual.
It really is. It's a visual summary of 43 ancient biblical rulers across hundreds of years. And what is so shocking when you look at this data is that grading rubric. These kings are judged on literally one metric, just whether they did what was right or did evil in the eyes of the Lord. That is the only scorecard that matters to the biblical narrator.
And it changes how you view everything they achieved.
Totally. And looking at that, it immediately made me think of a modern corporate environment.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you have a CEO who is completely corrupt, who, normalizes a toxic, cutthroat, win-at-all-costs culture.
Yeah.
Right. Eventually, the entire company adopts that behavior. It trickles down. But my question reading this was, if the leader is the one who is corrupt, does the biblical record give the everyday citizens a free pass? Are they just victims of a bad boss?
That's a great question, and the author addresses that dynamic head-on with a concept they call top-down sin.
Top-down sin?
Yeah. The biblical narrative rarely points the finger first at the everyday citizens for initiating a rebellion against God. The finger is pointed directly at the kings, the royal courts, and the priests who flatter them.
Wow.
The leaders are the ones who institutionalize the idolatry. They build the physical altars. They normalize the corruption. And then, the people inherit those consequences.
So the rot basically starts at the head, and the body just follows the sickness.
That's the argument. The author insists that systemic injustice in ancient Israel was almost entirely a top-down phenomenon.
So with that spiritual scorecard in mind, let's look at how these ancient kingdoms actually performed. Because after King Solomon, the nation splits into two, right?
Yes, the northern kingdom, which retains the name Israel, and the southern kingdom, called Judah.
Let's start with the north.
The data for the northern kingdom is frankly staggering.
According to the source, out of the 20 kings who ruled the northern kingdom of Israel, exactly 0 are considered good.
0.
Every single one of them, all 20, receives the ultimate failing grade. He did evil. I mean, a 100% failure rate over a period of centuries.
And that absolute failure rate forces a massive question. If these are supposedly the chosen people, why is their leadership batting 0?
Right.
To understand that, the author points us to the very first northern king, Jeroboam I. He becomes the prototype of this evil, and it's a brilliant psychological study, actually.
How do you mean?
Well, Jeroboam wasn't necessarily trying to be some cartoon villain stroking a white cat. He was a deeply insecure politician, and he was terrified of losing his grip on power.
Right, because the religious capital, Jerusalem, was down in the southern kingdom. He worried that if his citizens kept traveling south to worship, their political loyalty would eventually shift back to the south, and, they would assassinate him.
So he crafts a theological convenience. He builds 2 golden calves and sets up rival sanctuaries right in his own territory.
He used to keep people home.
Exactly. He tells the people, "It is too much for you to go all the way up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods." It is a soothing, highly convenient lie.
It's political self-preservation masquerading as religious innovation.
That's a great way to put it. And the biblical text condemns him utterly for it, stating, "This thing became a sin." Jeroboam didn't just tolerate a bad practice. He funded and built an institution of rebellion to secure his political base.
He weaponized religion for statecraft.
Precisely. And from then on, almost every subsequent kingmen like Baasha, Omri, and the infamous Ahab is explicitly condemned for walking in the way of Jeroboam.
So they just followed this dynastic pattern of institutionalizing sin for political convenience.
Yes. The author actually notes that Omri is described as doing more evil than all who were before him, almost like this top-down sin compounds over time.
It gets worse with each generation.
Exactly.
But then we have the southern kingdom of Judah, and it's a completely different story, right? A bit more of a gray area.
It is far more complex. Judah actually has a few bright spots, a few moments of genuine reform, but the overall trajectory is still deeply flawed.
Hold on, I have to push back here, though.
Go for it.
Looking at the essay, even the southern kings who are historically celebrated seem to fail the test. The author mentions Solomon, who literally built the legendary temple.
Right.
Or a king like Jehoshaphat, whose heart is described as being aligned with God. But they're still marked as compromised on the spiritual scorecard. How can the text possibly mark them as failures just because they weren't perfect?
Because of a vital biblical concept known as the high places.
The high places.
Yeah. The author explains that a ruler in Judah might enact a great religious reform. They might tear down a massive temple to a foreign god in the capital city.
Okay.
But they would leave the high places, these smaller, convenient local altars out in the hills, untouched.
Because it's incredibly politically unpopular to take away the local conveniences of your constituents. I mean, you don't want to lose a rural vote, right?
Exactly. It's a calculated half measure. And the author points out that the biblical text does not view these half measures as neutral or pragmatic.
They see it as a failure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those untouched altars become generational vulnerabilities. Next king comes along, inherits those altars, and uses them to plunge the nation right back into full-blown corruption.
So a tolerated compromise today becomes tomorrow's institutional collapse.
Well said. King David is used as the ultimate benchmark. Later kings are judged by whether they walked as David walked, meaning fully refusing to enthrone rebellion.
But mostly they didn't.
Right. Aside from a few rare exceptions like Hezekiah and Josiah, the compromise always wins out. And ultimately, both the north and the south end in total ruin and exile, swallowed up by the brutal Assyrian and Babylonian empires.
Wow. So we have established this massive, almost unbelievable failure rate among Israel's ancient kings. The spiritual scorecard is a disaster.
Total disaster.
And this brings us to the central thesis of the essay. Why did they fail so consistently?
Right. The author argues that it is not a coincidence, but a feature of being chosen.
Mm.
Because Israel is designated as a kingdom of priests, their leaders are standing in a heightened arena of spiritual conflict.
The author introduces this overarching idea of spiritual warfare here.
They do. The premise is that the adversary doesn't need to tempt or corrupt every single citizen if he can just poison the well at its source. He aims for the head of the nation, knowing the body will stagger.
So if you corrupt the king, the entire nation's trajectory shifts.
Look.
It makes complete sense strategically, you know? Like in chess, you don't waste your time trying to capture every single pawn on the board.
Right.
You just have to trap the king to win the entire game. You focus all your destructive energy on that one strategic target.
That's a perfect analogy.
But wait, if the author is saying the devil is actively, relentlessly targeting these leaders because they're chosen, doesn't that sort of remove their agency?
I see where you're going.
Doesn't it become the ultimate "the devil made me do it" defense for these corrupt kings?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the author balances this. They are very careful to say, no, it doesn't excuse them. Spiritual warfare does not erase human responsibility.
Okay, how so?
The essay points to Zechariah's vision of Satan accusing Joshua the high priest and Jesus warning Peter that Satan asked to sift him. The satanic interest in destabilizing religious and political leadership was heavily documented in the text.
Right.
But the author reminds us of how the Torah anticipated this exact vulnerability with the law of the king.
Oh, wait, didn't Deuteronomy explicitly require the king to literally write out a copy of the law by hand?
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Deuteronomy commanded the king to write out a personal copy of the law and read it every single day of his life.
Every day?
Every day. And the stated reason was to mortify his pride, to ensure his heart wasn't lifted up above his countrymen. It was an ancient mechanism designed specifically to humble the leader before their power could calcify into that top-down sin.
So the spiritual warfare thesis doesn't replace the historical reality, it deepens it.
Precisely. The kings chose to build those idols. They chose political expediency over ethics. And they are held historically and spiritually accountable for those choices.
Right.
As the author beautifully phrases it, the leaders may have a spiritual bullseye on their backs because of their position, but they still pull the trigger on their own corruption.
Okay, here's where this deep dive gets incredibly intense.
It really does.
The author takes this entire 3,000-year-old framework, this theology of top-down sin, the bullseye on the backs of chosen leaders, the spiritual scorecard, and they pivot directly into the geopolitical crises of 2026.
Yes.
They argue that ancient Israel isn't just an old story. It is a mirror for the universal human condition, especially when humanity is entrusted with immense unchecked power.
And again, as a reminder, we are stepping fully into the author's highly critical perspective here. We are just analyzing how they apply this framework, not endorsing the political claims.
Absolutely. So the essay turns its focus squarely on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And the author doesn't just call Netanyahu a bad leader. They map his specific actions directly onto the way of Jeroboam and the ancient kings we just discussed.
And the critique is blistering.
It really is.
The author cites the catastrophic humanitarian reality in the Gaza Strip as their primary evidence. But they don't just point to the news. They build their case by citing very specific, severe international actions.
What?
Well, they point to a detailed report from Amnesty International accusing Israel of genocide, grounding that claim in patterns of systemic destruction and civilian deprivation.
Right, and they also point to the ongoing case before the International Court of Justice, noting the ICJ's orders for provisional measures to protect Palestinians.
Exactly. And perhaps most significantly for their thesis, they highlight the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Which is massive.
It is. To the author, these aren't just geopolitical headlines. They actually view these international courts the same way the biblical text viewed the ancient prophets.
Wait, really? Like as prophetic voices?
Yes, as voices calling out the violence and top-down sin of the king.
Wow. The author argues that modern leadership is claiming sacred necessity to justify profound humanitarian destruction, which is the exact same rationalization Jeroboam used to bid his golden calves.
Exactly.
It's doing evil under the banner of necessity. But the critique doesn't stop with Gaza, right? The essay also brings up a massive escalation that occurred in February of 2026 involving Iran.
Yes. The author references Reuters reporting from February 28, 2026. This reporting described a preemptive attack on Iran launched by Israel, which was accompanied by U.S. military action.
And the author's analysis of this strike is where the spiritual warfare framework really comes into play.
How so?
Well, they point out that according to the United States' own intelligence community, Iran was not actively building a nuclear weapon at the time of the strike.
Right.
Furthermore, the essay notes that diplomatic negotiations happening in Geneva had been making substantial progress right up until the missiles flew.
And for the author, this strike wasn't an unavoidable act of national defense. It was a deliberate rupture of peace efforts.
Right.
They interpret this preemptive strike, which was untethered from an imminent verified threat, as the action of a leadership spiritually besieged by dark forces.
That goes right back to the bullseye concept.
Exactly. When leaders are driven by pride and fear, the author argues, they lowered the threshold of war to mere suspicion, bypassing diplomacy entirely. It mirrors the reckless pride of the kings who led ancient Israel into disaster.
But the author isn't just pointing fingers at the Middle East, are they?
No, they aren't.
The essay issues a severe, unyielding warning to Western Christians, specifically targeting the movement known as Christian Zionism.
And we need to be clear about how the author is defining this. Think of Christian Zionism in this context, not as some dry dictionary term, but as a deeply entrenched political filter.
A filter.
Yes, it's a theological lens through which millions of American Christians and their elected representatives view modern Middle Eastern conflicts. They often tie the modern secular state of Israel directly to biblical end times prophecy.
And the danger, according to the author, is that this filter accidentally gives modern rulers a total blank check.
A blank check, yes.
Like, if you believe a modern government is divinely ordained, you stop questioning their morality. You just throw out the spiritual scorecard.
The author argues that this theological lens causes many American Christians to completely lose their moral discernment.
Wow.
They warn against giving any modern ruler unconditional support simply because they govern the geographical space of the chosen people.
Right.
The essay practically demands that Christians look at the innocent suffering caused by these wars and refuse to sanctify it with religious language.
And they name names, too. The essay names specific American politicians to illustrate how dangerous this blank check can be.
They do.
The author quotes Senator Ted Cruz, who stated that the U.S. must give Israel all the weapons and all the time it needs. The author is horrified by this statement.
Extremely horrified.
They ask, what happens to innocent civilians when political rulers who are highly susceptible to corruption are handed unlimited weapons and unlimited time without any moral constraints?
And they also single out Senator Lindsey Graham.
Right.
They describe his posture as essentially bloodthirsty. The author heavily criticizes Graham's interventionist praise of the Trump-Netanyahu partnership.
Because of what it leads to.
Exactly. Arguing it creates an environment where the catastrophic loss of innocent life is treated as a mere afterthought, or worse, a necessary collateral for prophetic fulfillment.
The author's ultimate theological conclusion here is quite radical, especially for readers who might come from that Christian Zionist background.
It flips the script entirely. They argue that Israel's chosenness actually intensifies their accountability to God. It does not set its rulers above judgment.
That makes a lot of sense based on the history.
Right. Being chosen is not a carte blanche for depraved behavior. It places a magnifying glass on your actions.
The author pleads with believers not to let war propaganda, political slogans, or, prophetic branding blind them to the spilling of innocent blood.
It's a heavy plea.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the entirety of the author's argument, from the psychological fear of Jeroboam building his golden calves, to the systemic failures of the kings of Judah, all the way to the international arrest warrants and preemptive missile strikes of 2026, the core message is incredibly consistent.
It is. Power, when it is severed from a strict ethical and moral covenant, inevitably breeds devastation.
The author's haunting conclusion is that the story hasn't actually changed in 3 millennia.
No.
The spiritual warfare, the vulnerability of leaders, the top-down it's all identical. Only the names of the leaders and the types of weapons have changed.
This is the ultimate trap of being chosen.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you a free pass. It puts a target on your back and demands a higher standard.
Exactly. And if we bring this back to you, the listener, The implications of this essay go far beyond just one geopolitical conflict in the Middle East.
Much further.
Whether you are observing a war overseas, watching a national election unfold here at home, or even looking at the leadership structure of a corporate boardroom, this essay challenges us to view immense power with deep historical skepticism.
It demands that we do not romanticize authority, no matter how sacred it claims to be.
It's a stark reminder that no one, no matter their title, their political party, or their perceived chosen status, should be free from the restraints of a moral framework. The scorecard always matters.
Always.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative question to ponder based on this deep dive.
What is that?
If we accept the author's premise that immense political power inherently attracts a spiritual or moral bullseye, making corruption not just possible but almost guaranteed, how should modern democracies structurally design their institutions?
That's the real question.
Right. If the ultimate vulnerability of a nation isn't an invading army, but the high places left untouched by its own corrupt leaders, how do modern democracies build firewalls strong enough to protect everyday citizens from that kind of top-down moral collapse?